desire for their continual learning. Through the CRAVE series, our chapter will deliver webinars and virtual meetings to deliver timely and relevant topics that are affecting our industry today.
It's about the effort that we expend to connect with people. But you have an opportunity to see people, you have an opportunity to chat with people. We may not have an opportunity to have appetizers and share a drink with each other, but we stay connected, and that's really the most important thing.
Being able to work together and learn together in a new format, a new environment, really helped us take those pre-existing relationships and friendships that I had to another level.
CoreNet has taken the leadership in these kinds of conversations for years and years, and so we're delighted to have this long-term relationship with CoreNet.
I found the CoreNet to be a great community of dedicated real estate professionals, and what it means to me is it gives me a wider network of people with whom to share ideas, to derive the best learnings, to test and experiment with things that I'm working on.
This program is all about personal growth and becoming the leader that you want to be.
CoreNet has always led the way when it comes to supporting the professional development of our members. Our roundtable discussions, our education workshops, and our professional development programs are just part of what makes CoreNet so valuable to our members. It was critical for us to find a way to still be able to facilitate all of this. CRAVE has provided us the platform to be just as effective and to still provide that value to our members in a virtual environment.
CoreNet not only provides a platform for different groups to come together regardless where you come from in terms of organization, but really help each member to feel like they belong in this organization.
We have a diverse membership base, and you will find that members come from all walks of life and from all over the world. However, it's still an area of focus for us to improve upon and to embrace equity, inclusion, and diversity through increasing awareness and taking action, as we know this will lead to more success for the organization and for our members.
So my name is Karen Gill, and I'm a member of the Real Advantage CoreNet team, and I'd really like to welcome everybody today to our workshop. We have three panelists that Rich Bettina is going to be introducing very shortly, but we're very happy to have them on board with us throughout this whole discussion today. The topic today is something a little controversial. Do I need the office workplace? Let's go to the next slide. Just a quick reminder that we do have some timing concerns, the CRAVE video and the welcome remarks, then the introduction of the panelists, and then the panel discussion, and then the event conclusion. So this will be an hour's conversation. Throughout the conversation, we would love to hear from you. Please refer to the bottom panel of your screen to the Q&A section. And if you have a question for any or all of the panelists, please type it in there. We will be looking at that throughout the conversation, and we will ask your questions to our panelists as we go through. Just a quick reminder, that today is the last day for you to enroll and come to the annual CoreNet New England holiday party. It will be December 14th. It is an in-person event. It will go from 5:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. and it is at the Smith Group. If you need any more information about that, it is online as well. So please register today if you have an intention of going. Thank you. And something that's near and dear to my heart is how can we engage and really be a part of everything that CoreNet is doing. We have Instagram, we have Twitter, and of course there is LinkedIn. Your RFID codes are right here. If you have a little bit of time right now and want to get on right away, please do so. If not, please just join us in one of these forums just for that social connection throughout. Thank you. A very, very special thank you to our corporate partners. We couldn't do this without you. As well as to our platinum sponsors. Thank you very much for being a part of CoreNet. And our gold and silver sponsors are equally important. So thank you to everybody who is a sponsor of CoreNet New England. We truly appreciate your participation. And we enjoy our conversations throughout these events as well. With that, I'm going to be turning this over to my colleague, Rich Bettina. Rich, do you want to take it away and introduce our panelists?
Thanks, Karen. Thanks very much. I'd like to first welcome everyone for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us during this lunchtime. Happy Friday to everyone, by the way. I'll be talking a little bit about the topic and give a little bit of my own view on this and then introduce the panelists who each will have a different perspective. We've carefully selected the panelists who are experts in life and in their careers and their view of how we're handling these times. And I think it's going to make for some very interesting discussion throughout the next hour. So just in general, just so you know, I'm with Fresenius Healthcare. If you don't know me, I've been in business in many companies for 30 plus years, often always in a workplace up until the pandemic hit, in offices, cubes, you name it, any kind of work configuration there was possible. There was a time when I first started with Fresenius 4 years ago when we were hiring folks, and I remember very specifically thinking that we need people in the workplace because we need people to collaborate. We need them to be close to each other. And the team that I was hiring felt the same way. And so I actually remember, if you can imagine this in today's world, I actually remember not choosing good candidates because they needed to work from home because of their own personal challenges. And so that wasn't going to work for us in that model. If you had asked me then if I would change my mind, I would have said no, because I'm an old school guy and I think that's the way it works. And that's how it seemed like it worked. And I can tell you that with our existence theorem now and what we've seen over the last couple of years with no dropped balls and excellent execution from remote sites, I've done a 180 on that. And so despite some of the challenges of not being together socially and so forth, which need to be managed one way or another, company by company, it's clearly a different world for all of us. We all know that. So we have Dan Lawson from Philips, who is going to talk with us. Also, Brett Yancey from Fresenius and Patricia Nobry from Gensler, that all bring different perspectives on this. So Dan, if you wouldn't mind, if you could kick it off, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. I might have joined the wrong meeting based on that description of our qualifications, but no, thank you everyone for having me. My name is Dan Lawson. I'm the Director of Design and Construction from Philips. And I think when Rich asked me to join at first, I was thinking about collaboration and hybrid working and all those things. But as we talked as a panel last week, I'm more interested in the broader topic and the get outside of COVID. That's the last time I'm saying that word today, and get outside the hybrid working. I think this is a little more aspirational and more what brings you to that office for me, and a little more about what Dan wants in life and career, and connecting all of those back to our workplace versus some of the challenges we all deal with every day right now. For me personally, a very introverted person. I got to push outside that a little bit within my career, which is good. I still think you need an office. But as we talk today, I would challenge everyone to think about why you need that office, what's your workload, what's your work process, and what inspires you to come into that work environment. As I've processed that and thought about today, I'm going to throw some concepts out around community working, community hubs, and wanting my workplace to feel like a service provider. I want to feel like the exceptional companies in the world today are really based around a service provider platform and an experience. So how do I make my workplace that? Is it my workplace be integrated into a Linfield marketplace concept where other vendors and platforms that Philips deals with are located there, and it's more flexible? And then in an ultimate, I want to be with my product. I want to be with what my company produces, which, why can't I work from a factory floor for a couple days a week? Why can't I work from a R&D facility for a couple days a week? So how do we break those workflows apart, make them about my community, which is, I think, becoming more localized as kind of companies have gone to the big hubs? And does our real estate and our workplace start to shift over 10 years back to small regional offices? Because I think one of the larger trends you see, the more people you bring, the larger hubs get, the larger the issues get, the more difficult they are and the more difficult they feel to make progress. So how do we get back together in small pockets maybe, and not the big hubs that we've moved towards in the last 5 years? So Rich, thanks again for inviting me, and I look forward to a great discussion.
Great, thanks for the comments, Dan.
Brent, love to hear kind of your aspirations for us.
Oh yeah, and thanks everybody. So my name is Brett Yancey. I'm a real estate portfolio manager with Fresenius Medical Care. Touching on what Rich mentioned, when I interviewed with Rich about 3 years ago now, one of his questions was, do you have any requirements of working from home? Are you okay with coming to the office 5 days a week? And of course I said yes, because A, I wanted the job, and B, it's all I ever knew. Obviously things have changed over the past year, almost coming up on 2 years now, working from home. It was, I think, pretty eye-opening for me and our team, how well we could have perform working from home. Back when we were in the office, Rich would, come out of his office, say, "Hey guys, huddle up. Let's just have a quick, conversation," and we could just do it right there, and then it'd be great. And our team was big on collaboration, so it was, it was just natural. And I think we were all surprised at how, seamlessly the transition was from working in the office to being at home. And so in my role, I manage a high volume of transaction activity, with our lease in our Midwest portfolio of not only medical clinics, which is, the primary focus of our business, but also office leases. And, prior to the pandemic, I'll give some kudos to Rich. He had this idea, we coined it FMC 360. So the purpose of this program was to provide a thorough assessment of options to the business to optimize our strategy on our overhead locations, whether they're new requests, existing leases coming up for expiration, or part of our portfolio study. Because, with our business, our primary focus is our medical clinics. With overhead office space, obviously you're spending a lot of money on real estate. We just kind of took a look at what we had out there, and we're just trying to, make wise decisions for the business. And so it was before the pandemic hit, which was, obviously you can't predict a pandemic coming around the corner, but we were kind of in place to deal with the current situation. So I thought it was an interesting topic when this was presented to me, given what we are currently doing as a team at Fresenius. So that's a little bit about my background. I think I'll pass it over to Patricia.
Thanks, Brett. And so I'll just give folks a little bit of background. So my role is actually working with a number of companies and organizations across different industries as they've been navigating this, right? So I lead the strategy lab out of our Gensler office. And our work spans from healthcare, education, workplace industries across the board, and really saying, like, what does this mean and how do we look at workplace? And I think even though, Genzer is primarily an architecture firm and we design spaces, and a lot of the folks on the call, that's our work, it's like real estate. I think the conversation needs to go to be thinking a bit more systemic about how do you really design the human experience? Like, there is no space, no matter how well designed, or no real estate strategy, no matter how thought out, that's going to make sure and enable all participants to have a wonderful human experience. I think you need to think a little bit also about policies, think about technology, think about culture. So really, I think the conversation has expanded and allowed us to bring in the number of different, become an interdisciplinary conversation in many ways, as we look to think, do we need a workspace? I feel like what we've seen, if one thing is true, is like there is not a one size fits all solution. So I'm hoping that I think in this conversation, we're not trying to say, oh, this is great. I attended this conversation last Friday over lunch, and now I know the solution to this for all of us. That's what came out of this conversation. I feel it's really to say, what are the things that matter, and what's the process for each of us in our own different organizations to muddle through and say what matters most to us. I think the pandemic individually has been a moment for a lot of folks to kind of reassess some things about their lives. Is this what I want to do with my life? Right? It led to the Great Resignation, as it's now being called, right? A lot of folks are like, yeah, no, that's not what I've been doing for our lives. And we're seeing the same thing happen at an organization scale to say, what's our DNA? Who do we want to be, and how do we craft our policies or space to reflect that? And as even with the ebb and flow of folks coming and joining the organizations to say, this is where we want to go. And we're seeing that we have some clients who are like, we are about in person, we're about hugs, we're going to stick to that. And we're seeing other clients say, we really don't need a workspace anymore. And we're going to find our spaces in third spaces, and this emergence of this idea of third spaces, whether, hopefully we expand thinking beyond hotel lobbies and conference rooms, but really to say, like, we're going to meet at, Boston Common in the summer, we're going to do softball games. We're going to craft community and culture in a solution that isn't either office or workplace or home, and kind of break that binary a little bit. So super excited to talk to all of you and have conversations that I think really enriched by questions from the panel as well. So as we're talking, you're like questioning things, please do pop it in. I think it'll make our conversation richer. And
thanks, Patricia. That's perfect. And yes, so reminding everyone, this is intended to be very interactive. We certainly can talk and talk, but this isn't a tell discussion. We want it to be interactive, and we want it to be real. Right? We're not talking heads, any of us. We want to make sure that we're being real about what our challenges are. What do we really see as individuals, not only as companies? What are we trying to get to? And that's where I think a number of the people, either the questions can come in, or a number of the people that are attendees here, or panelists rather, can address. One of the things that we talked about on what will I get back from the office, when you think about someone coming back to the office and the decision they have to make about, okay, I'll come back because my employer is asking me to come back, or because I want to come back. Somewhere along that spectrum, there's the right point of balance for the employee and for the employer. But let's talk more for the employee. What do people need? What are you getting back if you come back from the office? And there's lots of thoughts around this, around mentorship. There's thoughts around being close to the product. There's thoughts around collaboration, et cetera. Dan, I know that one of the things that you had mentioned previously was I think product proximity, or things that you could actually put your hands on. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it's something, so Philips has gone through a massive transformation the last 7 years. We're out ahead of our competition a bit in solely looking at medical device and wanting to be a service company around that. So we don't want to sell you an MRI. We want to sell you a hospital service to run all that capital equipment, ideally bring our global experience to smooth operations out within a hospital. And then unfortunately, outside of America, a lot of it is digitalization of the hospital spectrum. So when I start to think about that, and then I go to new developments that are live, work, play balance, and I see a urgent care provider and even more expanded services of urgent care, I kind of wonder, why do I tromp into a headquarters in Cambridge where none of our customers are? There's an R&D feel to it, but it doesn't feel like a hospital. And if that's our mission, it would be interesting as a real estate person, an IT person, I think, even a finance person, to sit not out front at the front desk, but if there's a work area in one of those environments, just take in that buzz and that what happens when a patient checks in. How does that experience work? I could think of design things around it, how you build the space. So I'm curious, how do you immerse yourself in a workplace going forward that brings you right to that customer product and ultimately that product experience, which seems to be the multi-pronged thing that we're looking for. So then the counter is you start to break apart that big hub mentality. So that made me think, okay, if I break apart that 3,000 people I just brought together and I push them back out into little satellite offices, are people coming back in faster actually, because it's a more controlled environment, it's a little smaller, you change some of those dynamics that you took away as we've all gone through and collapsed some of those little sales offices and 15, 20 people areas. So as you start to bust that out, then you say shopping malls are empty. Is there opportunity there as some of the retail market changes to continue morph that community feel around? And the last piece of that, Rich, I think that I've thought a lot about lately because of the conversations in society. If you get to a smaller community-based office of some sort that's flexible to your population, you draw in the local community. So now you start to tackle other diversity efforts and collaboration and inclusion. And I think there's just something there that might charge our workspace back to what we've all worked so hard to start to consolidate towards the last maybe 10 years with our assets. So I'm curious, anyone else feels that way? It's that expanded, fancier Starbucks support maybe out around where you live versus just in downtown.
So Dan, we do have a question here for you around that. And someone on the audience is wondering, have you seen some empty office buildings being slotted to converted to residential condos or converted to work, live scenarios?
We've seen not so much the conversion of space. I think any project space I've seen converted heads towards life science, especially in New England. But we've been part of a very successful development in Pittsburgh recently called Bakery Square, where that is a very live work play to the point where they're still bullish enough to break ground on 2 more buildings. And it's also the rehab of a decrepit factory area within the outskirts of Pittsburgh. So we have seen those live work play developments extremely successful. I know some of my former peers have done similar things in Plano. So it's definitely out there. And I think it's a great way to live. It's a very good balance. And I think that's what I try to tackle when I think about the topic now is how do I integrate more of my life into my career? Because I feel like when I started 20 years ago, my career was this special thing and you worked hard to keep it your career, and then personality over here and your family over here, where I think all those things have come together. And now that everyone sees what my office at home looks like, and some days when I have my pajamas on with my internal team, things like that, how do you ball all that together in the workplace now?
Great
Really
point.
good.
So yeah,
Okay,
sorry, go ahead, Karen.
No, I have another question, but go ahead with this topic. Yep.
No, I think that those are, thanks for the answers, Dan. I think that's interesting. And yes, we're much more integral from our personal to our work and working life today than years ago, right? Not that long ago. Now it's all intertwined. And I'm sure that Patricia has some thoughts on what she's seeing in companies around that.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that. The survey, Gensler has this a little bit of addiction with surveys, like surveying the world and having statistics behind findings. And it's been really interesting. And it's one of the big things that we've been asking folks, obviously, is why do you want to come back to the office, or what will be the drivers to come back to the office? And there's lots that we could talk about that, but one of specifically on the point you were mentioning, Dan, about like work-life balance and integrating this idea of like live and work. We see work-life balance as a reason to come into the office, and work-life balance equally as representative as a reason not to come into the office, right? Some folks are saying this pandemic's been a nightmare. My life, it's all blurred. I work at night. I do groceries at 9 a.m. I crave and miss like the delineations of my life. And that's where my work-life balance is. That's what well-being means. It's mental well-being. I'm going crazy. I can't stand this anymore. Other folks
I don't necessarily want to go to the office, but I got to get out of this room at some point.
And people feel that to different grades. And then there are other folks who are saying, like, this is the way life should always have been. What were we thinking? This 8 to 5, this absolutely does not work for me. And you see the same like visceral, like strong reactions as reasons where folks are saying, I need the office, and people are like, please, no more office back. So it's interesting to notice that. And then to notice like generational differences. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned like when you were like reasons to come back to the office, right? This idea of resources and spaces, and like this idea of like access to specific spaces, materials, and resources, right? And that came up. This was the first time that we're always trying to map things and see like what correlates to what. This is the first time that when we did it with our statistics, generational differences made a big difference into what the responses were like. And we started bucketing these folks out differently and saying, and we saw a lot of the Gen X and Boomer generation saying shared resources and coming back to spaces and the things, you know, that, and then we saw Gen Z and millennials saying very different things. It says like, I want to come to the office for individual work. I want to come back to the office for the visibility to be promoted and to be inspired by other people, to absorb the culture. So we're hearing very like, no one, like everybody says, I want to come back to collaborate. That's always an obvious answer, right? That would be a really boring finding, like, oh, we did all the survey, people want to come back to the office to collaborate. But then once you get into what's their second, third, and fourth things, why they want to come back to the office, it gets very different. We didn't see anybody of the older generation saying, I want to come back to do individual work, to do focus work. That just wasn't popping up, but it really was for the younger folks. And with massive retirements, I feel it's an interesting topic to hear all of your opinions on as well.
That's great.
So, Patricia, this feeds right into what you're talking about there. And this is a question about the Great Resignation. And what steps can we take to make a hybrid work environment more appealing when some competitors are actually offering full-time remote work?
I think that's a great question. Everybody feel free to jump in as well. But I feel like this idea of the Great Resignation, just to give some background, I think what we're seeing is unprecedented resignation, especially around like the folks who are in the 30 to 45-year-old population. And a lot of what the reasons they're going back to say, either it's higher pay, it's more flexibility in work, and it's just pursuit of happiness, right? Like those three things, just kind of like, I can get a better job opportunity. I have more flexibility, to your point, Karen, like I can maybe don't have to come into the office. I find another job around that. And I think a lot of what we're seeing, and the third one is happiness. And I think that third one is a key one to find like, to how to counterbalance that. A lot of the reasons that folks are giving is like they want purpose in life. You know, the pandemic, you're sitting at home, you're thinking, is this what I want to be doing with my life, with my finite amount of energy? And people are saying, I want it to be purposeful. I want to be doing something that matters. I don't want to be clicking this thing. And that's what we're hearing a lot. And I think it's about re-articulating what's your DNA, what's your purpose, what are you driving to the world? And I think a lot of what we're seeing around social impact, environmental impact, these things that, you know, have surfaced in the world for a multitude of reasons and have come to the forefront of vocabulary and everybody's talking about for multiple reasons. But again, I think that gets reinforced. So what we're seeing is, how do you create an office, a destination? But quite frankly, there's no amount of hot chocolate or no amount of amenities or ping pong tables or that's really going to drive someone to say like, oh, I'm going to take this job because they offer hot chocolate on Thursdays and there's Taco Tuesdays. You know, like the ways that we're starting to think about how to make the office a destination. I think the reason people are leaving is deeper. And I think the response needs to be deeper as well. And that is a part of the narrative. We are about coming together. We're about changing the world. And we do this together. And we come to the office. It's part of our culture. It's part of mentoring. The last thing I'll add to that is there's a lot of tension between what individuals feel and what organizations feel, right? And when we do a lot of these surveys, you're asking folks, what works best for you? What would best support your life? When we talk to leadership in organizations, we ask, what would support your team? How do you build mentorship? How do you build culture? How often would you need to come to the office, right? You hear individuals, often it's on that lower end of the spectrum. I individually only need to come into the office 1 day, 2 days, 3 days to get my work done. But to build a culture, build a team, to build a DNA, to be the team we want to be 5 years, 10 years from now, then you hear different responses and you hear folks telling what's more to 2 to 3 days, maybe sometimes 4 days to really build that. And I think it's that idea of like that you're not just you, that you're also part of, I think when we talk to the older generations, it's about building that culture, providing what we all had, right?
Good comments, Patricia. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask Brett to comment on a couple of things. One of the things that you mentioned was regard to having meaning, and I think it's generation agnostic. I think everyone needs to feel as though that they're part of a bigger cause and that they are contributing to that. They have some value add. And I can speak directly about Brett's experience at Fresenius learning from others and what he talked about during his introduction from a collaboration standpoint, teaming and hopefully some mentoring, but then also he was able to take advantage of working from home, and he with great fortune his wife had a couple of children, and he's been able to work from home on paternity leave and enjoy that side of it. Maybe Brett, you could give us what your perspective is between those or across that spectrum, if you would.
Yeah, definitely. I was lucky enough to come into a team of, seasoned veterans. Not saying they're old or old, they're older.
You always said we're old. You can just say it. It's okay.
I used to be the youngest guy on the team, but thanks to Mark for coming in. But yeah, working around people that are, more seasoned, smarter than you is great in any walk of life. And with our team, we had a lot of seasoned people, so you could just, look over the cube and say, hey, can you, what do you think about this situation? And, just do that just on a whim. I mean, now you can with technology, you can just do like a call like on Teams. We use Teams primarily, but you never know if they're busy or if they're, away from their desk or whatever. So there's something to be said about being able to actually see people and collaborate, just to learn. But then on the flip side, like you mentioned, I am, relatively new dad. My firstborn was born in May of 2019. So she was, I'm coming back from paternity leave. My wife is coming back from maternity leave, and then the pandemic hits, and it's like, okay, well, what are we going to do now? It was just the great unknown. But one of the benefits of that is, I could spend so much more time, with them through these developmental years that I wouldn't have otherwise. Whether it's commuting to and from work. I work in Lexington. I live in Natick, so it's, no traffic, 25 minutes, but with traffic, you could be in the car for upwards of an hour just getting there and then coming back. And that's the time that, you can't spend with your family. I mean, you get your work done, you're in the office, but then you got to get in the car, go pick them up from daycare. By the time you get home, have dinner, it's bedtime, and you miss out on all those minutes of just spending that quality time. So it's been good and bad. I mean, I do miss being in the office, to be honest, just because you like to see people, you like to just interact with other people. My coworker in the office these days is my wife. She's upstairs. I'm in the basement. Obviously I love her, but I'm sure if anybody that's married, just kind of you want to see other people. But yeah, long story long, it's been interesting for sure. I'm looking forward to the option of going back to the office, whether it's mandatory or not. I know our company's still kind of trying to figure out when we'll actually go back, how we'll go back, but there hasn't been a real rush to do so because everybody's been so effective, working from home.
Right. I think, Brett, it's a great point about what you hear over a cube in our old environment, right? And I think that is the draw I still look for every day. I've had the opportunity to build a new team within Philips and new Philips employees over the last year. And I think that's been the hardest part, is getting them to, very talented, they're off to great starts, but trying to mold as a team together how we manage a very diligent Dutch global process versus how we get our job done. And there's just those subtleties that you miss out a little bit. One of my teammates just left for her honeymoon. She's been with us about 6 months. And I think naturally being in the office, I would have heard a couple jokes from her trying to schedule that or her wedding. And you miss all that, and it's little things. And this week she kind of opened up and made a joke about sending her itinerary to the hotel. And the hotel manager saying, oh, well, I've never seen someone this detailed on their honeymoon, so we'll be ready for you, kind of joking. And I think that hit me this week as a very subtle thing that normally, not that you're intrusive about it, but those things come out around the water cooler, around over the cube. And I think those are the very difficult parts of all of this that I still look to put in place with my team and understand and get to know them that way. Because I think this is the video stuff's the challenge of all that. But again, I'm still back to I need to travel 2 hours to do it anymore and do it with an entire company when you really only see the 60 people that might be on your floor, depending how big your office is. So good. And then on the other end, I think on as you progress through just life too, that changes, right? I think as we talked about where people are focused and later in your career, I think that's the other part of driving why I want to be closer to our product, because I'm trying to envision a strategy to build and to support that product. So seeing where I might find opportunities is more opportunistic, if you will, being in those environments. So a lot of changes, but I think those cores of mentorship, collaboration are still the baseline of what we're trying to get to in our work environments and why you're drawn to them.
Yeah, so Dan, this question may be for you. So you built your team and everything. What about contingent workers? Where do they fit in? Do they become even more commonplace as employers and employees embrace a more fluid work method in a hybrid world? Can you give us your point of view on that?
Yeah, so I think the contingent worker to me is above and beyond that consultant, right? We all know in our world, you can be very successful as an individual contributor at running a PM firm on your own with a couple of good clients. I see contingent worker even beyond that, right? I've set up my lifestyle to work as a consultant to multiple companies because of my knowledge expertise. So kind of that expanded consultant services. And I could see that being the way back from the Great Resignation for especially more experienced employees. And I always, in my own head, think nurses have the most flexibility out of anyone in any industry, right? I know several nurses that can change jobs quickly. They can go to places like Fresenius, they can do home care so that to me is kind of that contingent model. And if we're all not going to the same place every day to see the same people, does my dedication to Philips change? And not that I'm not dedicated to my job, but I don't necessarily expect as much from a company that maybe 2-3 generations ago did. I don't have a pension. I don't have long-term commitment. I think if you're honest about big corporations, I think you do a good job, you're going to keep your job. But that wearing of the relationship between employee or employer-employee, I think is what then might bring that contingent worker out a bit more than we've seen it used as just the corporation using it and not the individual using their skill set to grow a little business on their own. And I have seen that from some of my European counterparts. I feel like I see a lot of like our brand and design people at Philips will work for multiple companies doing design at the same time. So a lot of issues to it, legal, patents, all that stuff. But I think I could see that becoming a very common work method if the current job kind of trends continue.
Yeah, so I kind of think of contingent as variable cost workforce, and so there's more flexibility from contingent as opposed to remote, which could be an FTE that you're building and developing a career with and building trust with over time while using a remote environment instead of just an office environment. What I'd like to hear from, it looks like there's a question in, but also what I'd like to hear from each of the panelists also is what is the top one or thing that you think you actually would get back if you were back in the work office? And it's not about the number of days, but if you were back in the work office with your team, what do you think is, or one of the one or top two things that, you would get back? And what do you think is one of the one or two things that is most of an obstacle for you and a challenge about that? I think that might be an interesting thought. But first, Karen, maybe we should just go to the Q&A here.
Yeah, and it really ties into what you just said, Rich. So the question is really around the reduced lack of employee-employer loyalty. So let's add in, do we think that's becoming a growing trend into the points that you just made?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I think we can tie all those things together because I think in a way, flexibility. Amy Edmondson does this great work. She publishes in Harvard Business Review, which talks about psychological safety, right? So she did all this research to say, she went to Google, she went through all these organizations to say, what makes the best teams? And best teams be the ones that are most resilient, less amount of errors, most innovative. What are the characteristics to get there? Psychological safety. I think it goes back to a lot of the things Dan was saying. Hearing about the wedding, coming to how do you build trust within a team, and how do you build a thing within that trust? There's a psychological loyalty to that team, a team where you feel like, hey guys, you know what? I think I messed up. I just talked to all the clients thing. This thing does happen, and you can be really open about it. And you can be proactive about that. And I think that's really hard to do if you're transient. And it's also really hard to do and build that if you've never met these people in person and you've joined an organization, you're a new employee, you've seen these people on the screens, this conversation's been very tactical. They haven't been about the wedding, they haven't been the water cooler conversation, and you lost this human element. So to me, I think to answer then your question, Richard, I think the biggest thing I would gain back from going back to the office is that this human component of cohesion, that not only because I want to hear about the water cooler thing or want to hear about the wedding, it's mostly this idea of like, how do you create this sense that you belong, and that you have this team, that you have their back and they have your back. I think when you get to that point, there's a bit of magic that happens, right? This team will they'll be more transparent, they'll have less error, they'll push the boundaries, they have a sense of like belonging, there's resiliency, there's loyalty, there's less resignation, there's like all these things, right? It cuts down to profitability, but ultimately it's this human experience, and kind of goes back to that first thing about like feeling you belong, feeling you're a part of something. So I certainly hope that that's not a trend, that we're going to like really becoming so transactional, and that I think there is a risk in these conversations that you're saying, yep, I was equally as productive. I used to get 30 reports now. I got 36 out reports every day out. This is the way to go. We're going to be much more productive. I think that's a huge lapse in thinking. It's short-term thinking that doesn't think more systemically about what helps organizations be ready for the new challenges that are on the pipeline. So that would be my answer to Rich's question.
Right, and actually a question that came in that is very tied to that, and you partially answered it, and maybe you fully answered it for you, Patricia, or you may have added comments. But the thought around the human relationships, interrelationships, or the interaction, the value, the high value of that is referred to as the quote unquote secret sauce that really makes things work. And how the panelists define a successful work environment going forward with that in mind. What are the kinds of things? And I think you touched on some of that, Patricia. I don't know if you wanted to add to any of that.
Yeah, happy to add. Also really curious to hear Brett and Dan's opinions on this as well. I feel like purpose in work, it's twofold. There's a purpose of the organization. We're going out to solve hunger. We're out in this world to do this. And then what's your individual purpose? And I think that's a different response to say, like, I really believe in the mission of the organization that I'm a part of, but my individual purpose is every day to see that we're delivering a product that is better than it was yesterday, right? Whatever your individual purpose piece is. And I think having both of those and having those meet and connect well and having that be an intricate system is kind of essential to the answer of like, how do you feel about defining purpose to employees and making that meaningful? You kind of need to have both of those things. And then I think space comes in to reflect that, right? I think you need those first, and then you can design a space that really mentors that. And that response may be a little bit different, but curious, Brett, Dan, how you see like purpose and.
Yeah, Brett, I'd be curious to hear from you on that, especially that commute part of that question, and how does that commute override the experience, or how do you override that commute to get to your experience? What's that balance? Yeah. Especially with two kids that you don't want to leave. I don't blame you.
Yeah, I mean, logistics is certainly an issue when it comes to going back to the office. In this generation, it's like my wife and I, we both work and we have two kids. So it's, how do we balance our jobs and our kids and kind of getting to and from where we need to go? Luckily, my in-laws live on the way to the office. So there's a day, as they get older, they're obviously have to go to school. But for now, it's, if it's a couple days that they don't go to daycare, they go to their grandparents' house, that could work. So the commute is definitely a hurdle, but it's not impossible. It's just something that we've all done for our entire lives, most of us, and I have, up until about a year and a half ago. I think one of the other hurdles, and I think someone said something about, are companies going to require people to go back? That would be tough because, you still have these residual, pandemic concerns with people that, not everybody's vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. Do people want to go back? And how safe are your companies making these workplaces, for people to actually come back? Given that everybody's been so productive working from home and you are relatively safe in your own bubble, in my office here. But certainly talking to people, especially new people, from, I think March 13th was the last day in the office. After that point, we had three new people come onto our team. So I've met literally one of them in person. And it happened to be at a lunch a few weeks ago. We just all met up and we're sitting outside. But if you think of it on the other side, like a new person coming into a team, all you've known is remote work and seeing people on a screen like this. It's kind of, I don't know, it's it's, I don't know if demoralizing maybe, but there's something to be said about seeing people in person and kind of getting to know people, like Dan said, like, you know, wedding stories or whatever, you know, like prior to the pandemic, I went to a friend's wedding in Jamaica on March 1st, 2020, and coming back, it's like, this is like right when everything was starting, telling people about it, but also kind of staying away. Like, I know one of my coworkers was kind of like, don't come too close to me, you know, like, it's just, you never know what's going to happen going forward with what's going on in the world coming back to the office. It's kind of, I don't know, it's just a weird spot. And I know, Dan, the COVID might be a trigger word for you, but so that's just something that we'll just have to adapt to moving forward.
Yeah. Brett, do you think that, excuse me, Dan, do you think that that's one of the most compelling values that you would have, is actually just being with other people and interacting with them?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you know, having you know, just picking someone's brain about, you know, a certain scenario, but having those team strategy meetings, you know, if a company, or, you know, if my company didn't require us to come back, I think it would be best if we came back at least once a month or something, just to kind of strategize as a team and get together with people, just because those relationships building those relationships are invaluable when part of a team.
Right. Thanks. Sorry, Dan, what were you saying?
No, okay. I was just going to mention, I agree 100% with the question. The secret sauce, I think, is still about getting together. It's having that opportunity within your team or outside within your company. And it is still that very much, it all drives with people getting together and being honest with each other through their work. I think I just question, where is that going to happen? And with today's job trends, I would argue that my work needs to come to me closer. I think there's enough push in certain places where maybe that big office and that long commute from Andover to Cambridge is not what I want to do anymore. So that creates that cycle of resignation. And now I feel more in control of my income and how that's going to happen. Because I think the other thing, the stop and going to the office has taught people is, maybe you have a little more flexibility in your own financial life when you're not spending $500 a month to get to work. And maybe that little, like, I feel like that's some of those shifts too, is people are understanding their own setups in those ways and realizing, wow, it's not only 2 hours a time, but, you know, in some people it's $1,000 a month, depending on parking spot or commute or a train. And so I think all that just makes it an interesting time as we start to try to find that next place in the workforce.
So there's a couple of questions that I'm going to kind of combine here, and it's about the physical space itself. Does it have to be designed a little bit differently? What type of amenities are required now, and how does technology blend in with the physical space in order to accommodate this hybrid world? And I think this would be really great to go around the entire panel and just get a few bullets from you on this.
I think the answer is yes, yes, and yes. It's definitely a different way of designing spaces. I think the answer to the amenity spaces, I think one thing would be well-being, being at the forefront of thinking about amenities, but really urge everyone to think of well-being beyond the juice bar of well-being, and not a fitness room and well-being. But I think a lot of it's been about mental well-being. So it really comes down to this, but like, what are spaces that allow for different folks to come together? Not everybody, but for the introvert, for the extrovert. What is that idea of connectivity? What does that look like? And what are spaces that are very conducive? So we've been doing like an oasis in a space, has a tea room and has like carols that are much more individually focused, and you can kind of bump into people into whispering space. And you have the quiet, the loud lounge that plays jazz. And so it's really, I think about like thinking about designing to the edges around amenities for well-being, but most around mental well-being and thinking beyond the physical well-being, I think would be like one concrete thing that I think will definitely start shifting and changing in terms of the workspace and the amenities to support that.
Nice. Dan?
So I think for us, it's been interesting. We actually opened a big hub in Pittsburgh, as I had mentioned, and we had all the work trends in place. We were very confident about, we have a workspace that's going to last a while, even as through COVID, it's stood up well. The one piece that we have discovered, and this is an office of engineers, so they've been in the office, we have some population there, they have labs they have to access. So what we've seen there is the lack of technology and collaborative spaces bit us a little bit, because the thought was always we'd be standing together to collaborate and you wouldn't pull in the video experience because it was too expensive and people just need to come in for that meeting. Where with add social distancing to the building, all of a sudden we don't have enough large areas just to stand and talk. So I think the integration of technology into the workplace and into the non-traditional places for us has become a big push this year. And we're already upgrading brand new offices around AV so that they integrate with Teams better. In the whole technology coming on board, getting your video, getting your audio is a lot more seamless. Unfortunately, it also comes with a huge cost, but I think the collaboration mix is a good trend and we were already there with it. The only negative concern I worry about is that introvert, that engineer, that person that wants to come to the office, but still needs a private space to run calculations and things like that. So I do think you got to keep some private spaces to the office. And I think to touch back on that loyalty factor between corporation and employee, that part of cutting desks and cutting space and cutting, I feel like it's going to push back a little bit because, okay, I'll come in the office, but I want my desk back. I want my 6x8 back, and I'm happy to be here every day. I don't want to be shoulder to shoulder when I have an option for my job. I have an option on a commute now, and I don't have to be here every day. So that's where I'm curious, the push and the pull of all of that in the office environment. Does it get a little more space back for the person to sit at their desk and work all day?
Really nice. Brett, do you have an opinion on that one?
Yeah, and for us, we haven't actually returned to the office yet. Like I mentioned before, it's still kind of, they're not rushing into it, but when we do go back, it's just being smart about it. And so one of our strategies is a future of work. And so this is the creation of a flexible work environment through an evidence-based design and technology with the goal of providing employees space to collaborate and work effectively while in the office. So we've partnered up with some companies to use software such as iOffice, where you can, if you're going to go into the office, you could, take a look and reserve a workspace. The days of having a desk with a nameplate on it are essentially gone because they're not needed, and we're trying to consolidate, into some regional offices around the country that are not, the medical clinics.
Really good.
I would like to just add a couple of things with regard to the amenities question. I don't think of amenities as candy bars and coolest laptops and what used to be talked about in the early millennial, oh my God, keep everyone happy days, right? I think more about value proposition, and I think amenities are giving employees choice. So personally, I feel as though you need to give employees the alternatives and the opportunity to work in work environments, to Brett's point, where we have different companies doing different design alternatives for different office situations or workstation situations that are all reservable by anyone. Nameplates come down and people can use whatever they need to when they need to. I think that really helps the employee feel self-empowered. It gives them the opportunity, if they want to come in 5 days a week, come in 5 days a week, but it also gives them the opportunity to meet as a group. So I think that's really important. Brett touched on the technology piece. And the only other thing that I would say from my perspective is that oftentimes I think companies and technologies treat things like an event. And I try not to. I always try to think about 5 years plus. And I always think about continually evolving everything that we do. So no matter what we come back to, when company X says now's the day we come back, whatever that workplace is, that workplace has to be right for the employees. And then you have to continually read the demand against the capacity. How many people are actually using it against what you have? And how do you continue to alter it? It's a continuum. It's not something that we're done. People are happy now. Let's all go back to normal. What we have to do is we have to continually be flexible for the needs of the employees as much as for the company. At least that's my perspective on it.
And I think too, you got to educate, right? In any environment, you got to bring that thread of the designer to your people, because I think that's probably the biggest problem we have in new spaces is 9 months ago, we spent a lot of time understanding why that wall is where it is and why that collaborative is where it is. And then you open the building and no one tells the people sitting in the space. So I think that is the other part of the work environment. And then quite frankly, around all of this, I think sometimes I step back as a real estate professional and say, is real estate going to be the driver on this one? And I kind of feel like real estate is going to catch up to how the world comes back to whatever that normal is, to be frank. I don't think we'll drive that answer. I think we'll pivot as different environments or different companies start to make changes and try to push forward in some way, because I think we're all still back and forth. So as someone finally goes gas pedal down when they feel comfortable, there's going to be some kind of shift, and it's not going to be what we talked about today, I bet.
Right. So I guess what I would say is that we're close to the top of the hour. Are there any final comments or questions, but assuming that nothing else pops into the Q&A that we can address, any final comments from Brett, Patricia, and Dan before we close? And Karen also, if you'd like.
Yeah.
Brett, could you go, or I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
Patricia.
go ahead. Brett. Sounds good.
Brett?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think they're all very good perspectives. Patricia, you definitely bring the energy, and I like the passion about the workplace. I'm kind of torn, between going back and staying at home. I think there's benefits to both. I think the people aspect is invaluable. Just seeing people, but I don't know. It's tough because once the pandemic's behind us, what's going to come next? We'll just have to pivot, like Dan mentioned, and kind of adjust accordingly.
Thanks, Brett. Patricia?
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with what you were saying also about like this is an era of like choice and autonomy, right? It's a different way. And I think to Dan's point, that's the ability to pivot. During the beginning of the pandemic, we're like, oh, eventually there's going to be a vaccine and the pandemic will be over. And there will be life pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic life. And we're just waiting for things to get back to normal. And I feel like that's been redefined, number of variants, number of people, for many, many reasons. This shift of thinking of it as a pandemic to more of an endemic, right? That this is something that may stay with us for longer than anticipated. And one that's not going to be like, and how do you enable organizations to not hit pause and be waiting for this new normal to begin? And this is like this in-between period, but thinking this is the life, I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, this is the life they know. My daughter walks into a store and she's like, I'm not wearing a mask. And it's like, that's her normal. I think that is the new normal. So I think reframing that idea, and I think this ability of, from a real estate perspective, just really pushing that boundary, like how can real estate pivot? We're doors and mortar and bricks, and how do you allow, technology is one thing, but how do you allow real estate to really be fluid and flexible? I think it's a challenge for everyone on this call, the attendees, like that's our job, that's our lives, so.
Thanks, Patricia. Dan, comments?
I think to expand on what Patricia said, the same kind of theme where it's going to be interesting, right? I think the corporate structure and the organizational structure that a lot of us live under actually came out of World War II. A lot of companies were not structured like that until people that were military trained and were very successful in the Greatest Generation implemented that in their work life. So I'd be curious 5 years from now when we look back at people that have figured out a way to move forward, how that's then in leaders, right? Corporate leaders and not just technology companies, but Liberty Mutuals of the world, Phillips of the world, State Street of the world, Fidelity, kind of those quiet sleepers that don't make the news when they make real estate decisions all the time. How do they carry that forward to support their leaders that are looking past the pandemic and what those next generations need? Because I think collaboration, secret sauce, getting together is never going to change, but where you do and how you do, I feel like we're going to push back to a little more regional, smaller communities to challenge all those drastic and big, heavy questions that society is struggling with right now. And then lastly, thank you everyone for joining us on a Friday afternoon. Hopefully there was some value taken away, and I appreciate everyone listening to my thoughts in our panel.
Thanks, Dan. Karen, do you have anything to add before we close out?
The only thing I have is, in listening to all of the panelists, thank you very much first off. I'm going to leave everybody with a question. If this is the new normal today, how are we going to do scenario planning for 5, 10, 25 years out, which has been the norm? And a lot of our scenario planning has led us to pre-pandemic, but what can we do to get that scenario planning going? And how should we be thinking in terms of 25 years from now? Because that's really something that we also have to do. So that's what I'm going to leave everybody with. Rich, maybe it's a different topic.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. And thank you to all the panelists. And thank you very much for all of the attendees for, maybe you were eating lunch because we can't see you. I hope you were eating lunch while you were listening, but I hope you also found the discussion to be helpful to you. Thank you for sending in the questions. And as always, please continue to participate with CoreNet and these CRAVE sessions. I think there's a lot to be had from them because of you working with us on this. So thanks very much and have a nice day and a good weekend. Take care.
Thank
Stay
you.
healthy.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.